Thank you all so much. So great to see you. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you, Dr. Schaefer, for inviting me and hosting me. I just had a tour of your facility. It's really beautiful here. I was saying to Dr. Schaefer yesterday, I think my family visited Omaha when I was really little, but I barely remember, so this is my first proper trip here. I'm very happy to be here. My talk today is called Composing Space, Resonant and Analog Digital Approaches. So let's get into it. Short CV, you heard a little about this. I have a bachelor's in music composition. That was mostly acoustic composition. In my graduate work, I got more into the technology side, especially using Max MSP, which many of you may be familiar with. My graduate project was on voice and laptop, so doing extended vocal techniques acoustically and then extending those further digitally. Then I taught at Brown for several years, and now I'm no longer teaching. I'm a freelance artist, basically, and most recently I had a wonderful couple months in Vienna this spring, in Wien, as an artist in residence, where I created a short installation piece, and I'll tell you more about that. So that's a little about me professionally. And then, must mention the mask. I wanted you to at least see my face. I sort of joke that, like, normally in life you can't see the bottom of my face, and then I put the big sunglasses so you can't see the top. You can never see the full thing. But this is just because COVID is still around, flu. I just had an uncle who was in the hospital with COVID, really serious. I don't want to put you in the hospital. I don't want to put me in the hospital. So that is why. However, I am friendly, and if you want to do an unmasked conversation, we can step outside and enjoy the beautiful weather and have a conversation. Isn't that, I think that sounds lovely. All right, this talk will describe various intersections of resonance and space in my creative work. 3 parts of this talk. First, musical and rhythmic and resonance elements. And secondly, the spatial and the technical. I'm doing just stereo sound tonight, but I've done a lot of multi-channel, so like 20 plus channels in this kind of big surround configuration, and I'll kind of talk about how multi-channel and stereo compare and contrast, what we can take from both. And then finally, more of just the generally artistic and poetic and affective elements, including community collaborations and how it all fits together. All right, first off, musical and rhythmic and resonance elements. I wanted to share this one good piece of news from this calendar year, or interesting. This came across my feed in March. Did anybody see this? Okay, this is fascinating, I find. All right, so we have a black hole we've discovered about 250 million light years from Earth. And now the details were a little vague on this, but I'm going to tell you what I read. So it blows bubbles of plasma, and as the bubbles expand, they create waves and ripples. And the periodicity of these waves, of about 9.6 million years, has created a very low B flat, which I find really beautiful. It's right next to this shadow here, but if you can see, if you're a staff reader, this is how you would notate this, all the way down there. So let's talk through a little bit of what is actually happening. Like I said, it was a little bit unclear, but I picture this black hole like a big baby babbling, just kind of blowing these little spit bubbles. And I couldn't tell if these plasma bubbles are actually popping or if they're just kind of staying bubbles and womping in and out. But either way, we're sending out this extremely slow resonance. Anybody know roughly the bottom threshold of human hearing in hertz? 20, right. I didn't calculate this. So 20 hertz would be about a, 50 millisecond period. It takes 50 milliseconds for it to do one cycle of the wave. It takes 9.6 million years for this. So this is way below what humans can hear. And then something else to think about is we're kind of between a music space and technology space and physics as well. Think about the difference between frequency, aka pitch, which is the rate of oscillation, versus a note. And if you're doing computer music, you've probably seen the term note envelope or gain envelope. So note implies there's a start and a stop to that pitch. So there's like a volume and a pitch element to a note. It's not exactly clear what the black hole is doing, but I find that really inspirational. So I'm thinking a lot about this. All sound is motion with some kind of regularity element. A very pure tone, sine wave, is extremely regular. A very noisy tone, like if you sampled a bus driving by, it would be totally chaotic waveform. But that is what is causing this sound, actually displacement of matter in a more or less regular way, right? So I find that so inspirational to think about, kind of orient as we're doing different forms of music technology. All right, so getting into my work, that was the huge macro black hole scale. And then I'm going to take it down to the micro. And so in some of my concert tonight, you'll hear bits of, this is what I call the ASMR element of my work. So a lot of little clicky sounds here and there. And I organize them around a kind of invisible or inaudible beat. So I'm going to play this one section for you. Listen for the sine wave, just boop, boop, really slow pulse. And then you'll hear all the clicks speeding up. And then they slow back down to the same tempo but out of phase. So listen to that. Okay, so you can imagine if you had a lot of those clicky things going on and you were not hearing the pulse, and then everything kind of coalesced back to a pulse but out of phase, then you're kind of understanding the pulse, but it's kind of vague. That's one big compositional way that I like to sort of imply a rhythm without stating it too obviously. Does everybody understand phase? The analog concept? I see some nodding, some confusion. The way I love to teach phase, think about the moon. It has a cycle. It has this roughly, 28-day cycle. Imagine if the Earth now had 4 moons. They were identical, same rate, but they were out of step with each other. So while one is at new moon, the other one's at, first quarter, next one's at full moon, last one's at third quarter. So they're all a quarter cycle off from each other. That's showing our phase difference. In analog, that's a concept called quadrature, where they're always a quarter cycle off from each other. But so that's kind of what I'm doing here in a more casual way, is getting all my little clickies at the same rate, but not at the same moment. So this is kind of this subtle rhythmic relationship between them. Okay. And then I also use quite long samples of several minutes or more. And many of these have different aspects of rhythmic quality within them. So I'm going to play some excerpts for you now. The first one you'll hear is me going like this on piano keys. Okay, and then the second and third are both analog, and you'll hear filter sweeps and then little bits in between them. So just think about the scales at which these samples are rhythmic. Again, thinking of our black hole, extremely millions of years long periodicity, or fast and slow, and think about that telescoping as you listen. Okay, so, right, again, multiple tempi. Within my performance patch, there are some opportunities for overlap, but mostly I just kind of let things do their own rhythm. And again, this kind of light-handed telescoping between different scales of fast and slow. All right, also I've done kind of combining with the analog and digital realms, a number of waveform design projects. I'm going to play this one because it's pretty straightforward. So I took this photo of this curvy line in between my hands and sonified that into a waveform.
Here's the photo I worked with. I derived a regression equation of the curve using the mathematics teaching software GeoGebra. For purposes of this version of Knucklewave, the fit of the regression equation is not bad, but I'll talk more about the challenges of sonification in a moment. Next, I brought that best fit polynomial expression from GeoGebra into MaxMSP, where I evaluated it across phase range 0 to 1, spanning 1000 milliseconds. Now I can play that 1 second long buffer at any frequency. And you can see the spectroscope and oscilloscope views here. I like how bubbly the spectroscope view looks, like a cute cloud illustration. As for putting this oscillator in a musical context, I really like how it sounds when filtered through this Your Analog Filter 8, an analog filter module. Here's a short musical demo.
Keep going. Okay, I'll skip this one for time. Similar kind of photo sonification project of a kind of beautifully ornate, like crypt, actually, grave wave. Okay, and then working with proper analog synthesis as well. You'll hear some of this tonight. I worked with the ARP 2500. Anybody know Eliane Radig? Really famous composer who works with this. I really recommend checking out her work, Eliane Radig. And so this is a really distinctive analog system. If you've worked with the analog modules in your studio, you know there's a lot of little cables you have to connect very often, and this has this patch grid that's almost like the game Battleship, where you have to just organize everything by grid and connect it that way. So I'll play a little bit of this. So as layers come and go, you can hear how there's this kind of additive effect of multiple resonances going together. Right, so again, thinking back to our black hole, the relationships between the frequency and the time domains of sound. I often use harmonic density, but I want a clear sense of foreground and background. And then also this kind of sonification question of control And in analog terms, a control signal is, or a low frequency oscillator, for instance, is in fact something that's quite slow and below the range of human hearing. So I find control a little bit domineering as a word, especially thinking if that relates to human interactions. So I much prefer to think of it in terms of slowness. What are we capable of perceiving? What is this rate of thing good at doing? That kind of thing. Right. Okay, moving on to the second part of the talk, technical and spatial. Let's see, I'll play a little more sound for you here. This is a longer video, but I'll just do a couple excerpts so you have a sense. About a year ago, I live in Providence, Rhode Island, which has Brown University and RISD, Rhode Island School of Design, among several other colleges. And RISD has this cool hemispheric multi-channel space where I had a research residency, and this is a bit of the result of that. So I'm going to tell you now, because people always want to know, tech setup, small Euro rack box, Korg Nano Control, and then people are always curious about this one down here. It's called an Orba by Artifon. It's a Bluetooth MIDI controller. It has tilt and twist axes as well as capacitive touch, so you can like slide along each of these pie piece buttons on the top. Orba by Artifon. Bluetooth connection is really robust. So if you're into this kind of gestural stuff, it's like the size of a teacup. It's really interesting as a controller. Okay, so back to the spatial. Oops, I got out of there, okay. Oh gosh, I've done this before. All right, RISD SRST, I was using Envelope for Live, E4L plugins to accomplish the spatialization. Basically summing up, again, since I'm doing stereo, not spatial here, that stuff is really robust technically, but it's easy with that or any ambisonic work to lose your low end. You can kind of hear it in this space. Of course, it has to do with space and mix and whatnot. But looking at Natasha Barrett's work on this, saying we have to balance kind of non-ambisonic with ambisonic in order to get the full frequency spectrum balance we want of lows and highs. Then furthermore, I continued this work when I was in Austria. I was mostly in Vienna, but had a few days at the Electronic Music Institute in Graz, where I used their in-house plugins, IEM plugins, which are also great, working in the Cube. So these plugins allow you to go up higher order ambisonics, which gives you a lot more detail of where the sound is coming from, particularly around you. On the other hand, it's very point source, which means you can't have a very kind of diffuse sound. I mean, if you think about it, if you're walking down the street, something could kind of come from over there, quote unquote. It's often not going to come from one particular pinpointable location. So that raises the question of how natural do we want our music technology work to seem? And that's a compositional choice, but thinking about then wanting to raise the ambisonic order to give a more natural quality. And I'm kind of going through this quickly for time, but I'll say what I've noticed in looking at the research is that interface is a huge deal. If you've done any kind of fabrication or building or even just trying out different MIDI controllers, you know that what you're physically interacting with makes a huge difference to what kind of music you can make. So that's this first point. And then the second is Carrie Hagan's research and her introduction of the concept of textural composition. So one sound and filter it in different ways and put those in different places in the mix. And that can be a really beautiful compositional technique for giving this kind of realistic haze to things. Further considerations, again, just kind of thinking about the natural versus the fidelity, and then how approachable is the interface when I'm performing. Okay, and finally, artistic and poetic and affective. So this gets into some more audio playback, and I'm excited to share these collaborative projects with you. I'll go through this quickly, but this is Marie Thompson's really excellent book, Beyond Unwanted Sound, which talks about noise. So noise music, but also noise out in the world, noise as a tool of warfare, which we are seeing with those kind of high density, what are they called, LRADs? They like shoot a really loud beam of sound at protesters and that kind of thing. So all different kinds of noise are discussed by Marie Thompson, and she's thinking of it as affect. Do y'all know about affect as a philosophical concept? Very loosely, I describe it as the vibes of a space. So like, if we have a really nice interaction, and you're like, oh, the vibes of that conversation were great. That's pretty much affect. It's like, okay, we were kind of pleasantly influencing each other. Maybe you gave me some good ideas, and I gave you, and we just kind of hit it off. That's kind of affect. And the idea is that everything can influence each other in that way, not only humans, but also, I mean, think about if you hang out with your beloved pet or go out in nature. So this kind of affect interaction. And Marie Thompson is saying sound and noise do that too. Okay, so one example of affect and collaboration. I did this collaborative piece where I scored this dance piece, and there was also video. This was a really big project. I'll play an excerpt where you see this central dancer is kind of acting as a mannequin, and the others come up and kind of move her, but also copy her. And the theme is identity and social media, and how we kind of like pick up these pieces of our identity just from how we live on social media. What about here, I think? So I found that a really interesting piece. That was 2015, which I think was pretty much before TikTok, but I don't know. I always think like with the affect space, like do you ever do a TikTok challenge and you're like, oh, that was not good, or that didn't work for me on this day? Yeah, so affect is like the scholarly way of saying vibes and like kind of these subtle connections and interplays. All right, inquiry, this piece I mentioned, is what I did in Vienna, 30-minute installation. Why is this? Oh, looping, sorry. Lavender lauds, excuse me. And so I used more photosonification, but use that to a control signal or slow panning oscillator. You'll just hear excerpts here. I really like, just to kind of recap and show you again, I really love the disconnect, the part where it gets slightly more horror movie sounding, but then you see the beautiful blue sky behind it, like right in here. I really love that juxtaposition. Did a good job. And then finally, what year are we in? Yeah, last year I was a curator in residence at a local music venue in Providence, and they do this series every year, and I was really proud of putting on this series that featured works of New England artists, especially women and artists of color, and doing really a wide range of music, inviting people in. This is just kind of a best of highlight, so you get a snippet of each one and get a sense of the range that we put on, that I was really proud of.
Let's make sure we live till we die. There is no better reason why than this blood that flows through our veins. While this heart beats now's not the same.
I find that last one so beautiful. Isn't that great? He actually, Adam Matlock has recently started it's an organization, it's a farm and a food sharing and teaching organization. So when he says this land's really got a hold on you at the end, it's about actually being in touch with the land and growing your own food and that kind of stuff. So again, I was really proud of this. I think often we see a siloing among different genres. Pop has to live over here, classical, experimental, weird stuff, and I don't see any reason for that. Let's put them all together because these people are all in the same region and we're all part of the same dialogue and scenes musically. Okay, so I'll conclude with this wonderful Octavia Butler quote. All that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you. I think that's very meaningful in a lot of ways, as you've heard about resonance and affect and space in sound today. So think about what do you change and what changes you. Here are some sources if you want to check those out. And I'll just say finally a big thanks to Dr. Schaefer for inviting me and to you all for your kind attention. And please give me any questions you have. Thank you so much.
What would you like to add to Maximum Speed if you could?
Great question. So many options. I would say a super okay, one of two things. Both would need to be super flexible, but like some kind of rhythmic grid, just to have to constantly build a tempo engine every time I want a beat. Oh my gosh, it's so much time. I mean, you can do abstractions, whatever, but, and then a more flexible drum machine kind of thing. Because I do a lot of sample work. I played you all those clicky sounds. That's like hundreds of clicky sounds, or sometimes I use the really long ones, but just like a really flexible sample playback machine, so I don't have to build that every single time. Be great. Again, abstractions can do it, but yeah, great question. If you have a connection to the cycling people, please pass it up for me.
So all those like click sounds, those are all samples you source yourself?
I record them myself. Yeah, and they're household objects usually. I bought what I thought were earrings, but I think they're napkin rings, but then I clicked those together, or a chickpea in a jar with a contact mic rolling around, or metal kitchen bowl with water, and that for a gong sound. You heard that really briefly in the RISD spatial excerpt. Yeah, but just household objects. Mm-hmm.
Could you talk more about Lavender Lauds and the kinds of things that were set up there? Because I mean, we saw speakers. It looked like it was in a public space.
Yeah.
Was it interactive in any way? Did it play into the part one talking about resonance of that particular space?
Right. Okay. So this was in Vienna. It played for a month. This was a 30-minute installation piece, which looped, I don't know, something like 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. every day for a month. The Tonspur Passage in the Museumsquartier. So Museumsquartier was a Baroque stables. So it's like this of the Kaiser. So it's this fancy place with a lot of courtyards. And this sound art organization in Vienna, Tonspur, owns this one passage. So they have 8 speakers permanently mounted, but it's not a circle. It's like a weird 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, kind of a long passage. It's right next to a subway station, so it gets a lot of traffic. It's fixed media, so it's not interactable. It's quiet at the beginning and end, and you heard some of those bits, and I mixed it pretty quiet because I wanted it to fade into the ambient sound. Of course, you've got people with roller bags and who knows what, kids and everything, all kinds of foot traffic. So it blends a lot, and then it kind of becomes more active in the middle. So it's composed to feel a little bit interactive, but it's really not. It's fixed. And I meant it to be not too startling. I get that, they have kind of noise ordinances. It can't be too loud. So it's in the middle at its loudest. It does sort of get your attention, but it's not overpowering in any sense. And I wanted it to draw a kind of curiosity. And the studio where they housed me, I could see it, and I could see people kind of walking. They're clearly on their way to something, and then they go, "Oh, what is this?" And I love that moment of just kind of, let me pause and consider this, even if it's just 5 minutes. I find that really lovely.
And then it seemed like there was lavender on the sides of the wall.
Yeah, the lavender photos I took myself. The lavender was one of these kind of sort of sonification things. I mean, the lavender was really just kind of a metaphor to get you thinking about annual cycles of flowers blooming. But it does go back to this cyclical thing, like I was talking about with the black hole and different rates of things. So lavender is just thinking about annual blooming of flowers. Lauds, does anybody know, have you heard of like Lauds or Vespers or Compline or any of those? Traditional Catholic services where the monks and nuns have a cycle every day. It's almost like Muslim 5, times a day praying. But the Catholic monks and nuns would have like unregulated hours, every 3 hours, I think. They would stop whatever they're doing and go do a chanted Gregorian chant service of prayer and chanting, and Lauds is one of those. I think it's at dawn is when Lauds normally is scheduled. So that was just kind of thinking, it's kind of a very subtle sort of deep cut thing, but just thinking about these cycles of human activity and contemplation. Yeah.
For your residencies, were they things that you were invited for, or did you apply for them, like with the pitches of your projects?
Applied. Yeah. Occasionally I get invited, but usually apply. Yeah.
How do you go about looking for different residencies that you feel like would suit yourself?
Great question. There are a few resources out there, a kind of databases of ones. I mean, I do a lot of Google combing, frankly. I think trans arts or trans artists, meaning like trans of like going all over the world. I feel like art, I'm going to forget the names. I can send you resources if you want, but Art Explora. There are some databases out there. I mean, Fulbright is a really famous one. You might have heard of Fulbright scholarships. Normally it's for professors having basically a semester abroad or a year to go and teach, but this was a unique one. It's an artist in residence one, which is really great. So that is a great question because it's an under-noticed and huge part of the artistic career is the admin and the applying. I cannot overstate how big that is. And frankly, most people I know get like 10 to 20% of what they apply for. It's a ton of work. But then it can turn up some really cool things. Yeah.
Can you talk about more of your experience with surround sound, like how you mix projects to a surround sound space? And then what's your experience with kind of transferring that surround sound to something like your presentation today, where you have maybe something mixed to surround sound, but you have to present it where you only have the two stereo fields?
Yeah. So a few different approaches. This one was a little unusual because I was performing live. You can see what I've done. You can see this overhead view of my hands. It's far more typical to what I did in this space was I pre-composed stuff. So normally what you're doing when you're working in a big multi-channel space, or even like a 8-channel, which would be considered relatively few for a multi-channel, is pre-compose it and spatialize live. So you're just controlling the position of where everything is. As you may know, for a lot of kind of shows, it all depends on how much sound check time you have, how much time in the space. This one was associated with like a 3-day residency, so I could really tune it to the space. And I did what I was talking about with Carrie Hagan, where I would take one sound, make a few copies, filter them in different ways, and put them in different places to try to get some resonance in the space that's dependent on their being in those places. So it's about time in the space, how much have you got? Well, I don't have it in here, but yeah, on the other hand, about a year ago, I did a 8-channel performance where it was like 15-minute tech, it's like very fast. I think kind of the first line thing. If I have only 15, 30 minutes or something, I always think about volumes. It's so simple, but just the balance of low and high parts of the spectrum. If I can get those kind of suited to the speaker system and the space, that's going to go a long way. If I have more time, then I'm going to be thinking about the details of the spectral resonance and how can I overlay things. And then in general, I do like to leave some silence and some quiet bits as well, even in these vast multi-channel spaces, because I think the temptation there is to like go maximalist. But I find that audiences really need a palate cleanser, so to speak, in certain moments. So you got to give little breaks, little bits of space. Has anybody seen the Quincy documentary on Netflix? He says Quincy Jones, it's really interesting. He says near the beginning, you have to leave 20, 30% of room in the mix for the Lord to walk through. It's this idea of, or you could call it affect, or like what is this kind of sublime quality that comes through when you don't give in to that maximalist temptation and actually leave a little space in your work. We have a couple more minutes. Do another 1 or 2 questions.
How long is your lavender logs installation on?
It's no longer running. It's online, so you could go and listen. It's 30 minutes on the dot, so you could just listen to it online. Yeah, but it was there for a month, looping, and then, yeah, there's more different stuff playing there now. Yeah. Yeah.
How long did it take you to compose Lavender Loves?
I was working on it for a couple months, and I didn't like any of it. And then, this is important to note that the boundary between composition and improvisation is very gray for me in many ways. I ended up, because I have a live, Ableton Live set where all of this lives, so I performed it live in like one sitting. And that was kind of 90% done, and then I tweaked it. So I kind of, after having like percolated for several months, then I actually composed it in a week. Which is, I hate to say that to students, but because you need the percolating time, or I do anyway. I hate to tell people to like cram, but yeah, it could go fast like that.
Do you think it's appropriate to talk about what you'll do at the concert tonight?
Yeah, I can share a little. Maybe it's a good tie-in because that last thing you heard from Adam Matlock with the accordion. So anybody know Pauline Oliveros? Amazing composer. Oh, you must look her up if you don't know. Deep listening. She was one of the like godmothers of 20th and 21st century experimental music. She was an accordionist. Accordion goes great with new music. I have found that concertina does as well. Concertina is like a small accordion, essentially. So I will be doing concertina and electronics tonight. It'll build on some of what you've heard, but also be different as well. But you'll hear, I think, some of these same elements of resonance and space in an analog digital way.